My name is Hannah Reed. I'm 18 years old, fresh out of high school in Austin, Texas. And if I had to define myself with one word, it would be determined. People underestimated me my whole life, sometimes even the people I loved most. But I've always carried a fire inside me. At my graduation party, my father raised a glass, looked me in the eye, and said, "You're useless." The room erupted in awkward laughter, but moments later, the dean stepped up to the microphone and announced my full scholarship. The silence that followed? It was deafening. If you're watching this, please like and subscribe. It means the world to me. Has someone you love ever humiliated you in front of others? Please share in the comments where you're watching from and whether you found the strength to stand tall afterward. I'd dreamed about my graduation party for years. Not because of the decorations, or the food, or even the music, but because I thought it would be a moment of pride. A night where my dad would finally look at me with the same admiration he gave my younger brother, Ryan. The backyard glowed with string lights, long tables draped with white cloth, and trays of food catered from Dad's favorite barbecue joint. Relatives filled the space, laughing, sipping sweet tea, balancing paper plates on their laps. I should have been happy. But deep down, I felt the familiar ache in my chest, because I knew my father, and I knew how quickly his jokes could turn into daggers. Dad wasn't always cruel. When I was younger, he used to toss me onto his shoulders, calling me his little champ. But somewhere along the line, his tone shifted. He stopped seeing me as capable. He valued strength, practicality, real skills in his words. Ryan, athletic, charming, always with a football in his hand, fit the mold. I, on the other hand, was quiet, bookish, and driven by academics. To him, studying late into the night wasn't a strength. Getting straight A's wasn't an achievement. It was a weakness, a waste of time, and he never let me forget it. At the party, I flitted between tables, forcing smiles as relatives congratulated me. Aunt Sarah squeezed my hand. "We're so proud of you, sweetheart. First in the family to graduate with honors." I smiled, warmth blooming in my chest, until I caught my father rolling his eyes. Ryan laughed with his friends by the grill, tossing a football back and forth. Dad beamed at him, clapping his shoulder. The contrast was sharp, painful, and undeniable. Still, I told myself tonight would be different. That maybe, just maybe, Dad would finally acknowledge me. As the night drew on, someone called for speeches. Dad stood, raising his glass of beer, and everyone quieted. His voice carried easily across the yard. "Here's to Hannah," he began. My heart leapt, but then he smirked. 18 years old and still doesn't know how to fix a tire, grill a steak, or do anything useful. Laughter erupted. A few chuckled nervously, others roared. My cheeks burned hot, my stomach twisted. He added, grinning, "But hey, maybe one day she'll figure it out." The laughter grew louder. My heart cracked. I froze, rooted to the spot, my paper plate trembling in my hands. Every eye was on me. Some with pity, some with amusement, none with respect. I caught Mom's gaze across the table, her lips pressed tight, eyes darting away. Ryan snickered, whispering something to his friend. And my father? He drank deeply, satisfied with his joke. I wanted to scream. I wanted to disappear. Instead, I swallowed hard, fighting back tears that burned like fire. Before the humiliation could settle fully into my bones, another voice rose. Calm, clear, commanding. "Actually," the dean of admissions said, standing from his chair, "there's something I think this family should know." The laughter died instantly. The crowd shifted. My father froze, beer halfway to his lips. The dean smiled at me. "Hannah Reed has just been awarded a full scholarship. Full ride, tuition, housing, everything. At one of the top universities in the country." Gasps echoed. A few clapped. My mother's eyes widened in shock. My brother's grin faltered, and my father. His face drained of color. In that moment, the world flipped. 1 second, I was useless. Next, I was unstoppable. But that wasn't the end of the story. It was only the beginning. Because humiliation doesn't vanish overnight, and the fire that moment lit in me would burn far longer than he ever expected. And one day, that fire would consume the very image of who he thought I was. When people look at families like mine from the outside, they see barbecues, Friday night football games, church on Sundays, and a close-knit suburban life in Austin. And for a long time, I convinced myself that was enough, that maybe the love I felt missing would someday appear if I just worked harder to earn it. Dad loved traditions, but only the ones that fit his picture of family. Every Friday, he grilled steaks in the backyard while Ryan tossed the football with neighbors. Saturdays, they'd fix cars together, grease on their hands, laughter, spilling through the garage. Me? I was in my room, highlighters and notebooks spread across my desk, memorizing formulas or drafting essays. I'd peek through the window sometimes, watching them. My chest would ache with a mix of longing and resentment. I wanted to be part of that world, but I didn't fit. When I tried, Dad always brushed me off. One Saturday, I offered to hand him tools while he worked on the truck. He smirked, handing me a wrench. "Careful, Hannah, don't break a nail." Ryan burst out laughing. I dropped the wrench back into the toolbox, cheeks burning. That was the last time I tried. Mom noticed, of course. She'd slip into my room, with tea resting a hand on my shoulder. "You're doing amazing," she'd whisper. "Your dad just values different things." Different things. I hated those words. Because what she meant was that Dad valued Ryan. Strength. Charm. Physicality. Things I didn't have. But she never challenged him. She kept the peace. She let his words stand, even when they cut deep. And in her silence, I learned to swallow my pain. When Ryan brought home a C on a test, Dad laughed it off. School isn't everything. He's got drive. He's got grit. When I brought home an A, Dad frowned. "What happened? Weren't you studying enough?" It was never enough. I could be valedictorian, class president, volunteer of the year, and he'd still find a flaw. Still remind me I wasn't useful. Not in the ways that mattered to him. So I built my own rituals. Nights spent in the library long after everyone else went home. Weekends dedicated to building a resume so airtight that no one could ignore it. I lived for recognition, not just from colleges, but from him. I thought if I just achieved enough, eventually, he'd look at me the way he looked at Ryan. But instead, the higher I climbed, the sharper his dismissals became. My English teacher, Mrs. Grant, once pulled me aside after class. "You're brilliant, Hannah," she said, her voice soft but firm. "Don't let anyone make you think otherwise." I whispered, "Even if that person is my dad?" Her eyes softened with sadness. Especially then. Sometimes the people closest to us are the ones who can't see who we really are. Her words planted a seed in me, a reminder that maybe, just maybe, my worth wasn't tied to my father's approval. Still, as graduation neared, I held on to a fragile hope that maybe he'd be proud, that maybe just once he'd see me. But deep down, I knew better. He had already started joking at family dinners. "Hope the dean gives her a job filing papers after she's done with all that studying." Everyone would laugh. My mother would lower her eyes. I laughed too, sometimes. Pretended it didn't sting. But inside, I was keeping score. Every comment, every dismissal. Every reminder that, in his eyes, I wasn't enough. And on the night of my graduation party, when he finally delivered his cruelest blow in front of everyone, it wasn't just the words that broke me. It was the confirmation of what I had always feared. that my father never really believed in me, but what he didn't know was that my silence wasn't surrender. It was fuel. Even before the graduation party, the cracks were showing. Looking back now, I see how every cruel word, every dismissive smirk, was preparing the stage for that night. One evening, a week before finals, I came downstairs with flashcards in my hands, still muttering equations under my breath. Dad glanced, up from his plate, smirking. Look at her, studying at the dinner table, like any of that will matter when the car won't start. Ryan chuckled, mouth full of mashed potatoes. Yeah, Hannah, maybe you'll write an essay to fix it. The table roared with laughter. My cheeks burned, but I kept my voice calm. Not everyone wants to fix cars, Dad. Some of us have other goals. He leaned back in his chair, beer in hand, eyes glinting. Other goals, huh? Like being a professional bookworm? Let me know how much that pays. I set my fork down quietly, staring at the food I no longer wanted. Mom shot me a glance, pity in her eyes, but she said nothing. As always. Later that night, I heard voices through the thin walls. My parents were talking in the kitchen. She's smart, Mom whispered. You should give her some credit. Dad scoffed. Smart doesn't change a tire. Smart doesn't put food on the table. My chest ached as I pressed my ear closer to the wall. Mom's voice softened. She's working hard, Tom. Harder than Ryan, if we're honest. Silence. Then Dad's voice again, flat and cold. Ryan's a man. She's just Hannah. Just Hannah. 2 words that cut deeper than any insult. A few days later, my guidance counselor called Dad in to talk about my college options. I was nervous, hopeful even, that maybe hearing about scholarships and recommendations would finally make him proud. She smiled brightly. Mr. Reed, your daughter is remarkable. She's in the top 2% of the state. We're confident she'll have her pick of universities. Dad leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. That's great, but can she actually do anything useful with it? Degrees don't mean much if you can't change a tire. The counselor blinked, startled. Sir, with respect, she's earned opportunities most students only dream about. He shrugged. We'll see. I sat frozen, humiliation crawling up my neck. Even in front of strangers, he couldn't give me 1 ounce of validation. That night, I went to the garage to grab a notebook I'd left in the car. As I reached for the door handle, I overheard Ryan and Dad talking. Dad's voice was low, serious. Don't worry, son. I've got money set aside for your college. Football scholarship or not, you'll be fine. Ryan laughed. What about Hannah? A pause. Then Dad chuckled. She won't need much. Girls like her, book smart but useless. They either burn out or marry someone who'll take care of them. My breath caught in my throat. I pressed my back against the garage wall, my heart pounding. Money for Ryan. Excuses for me. That was the reality. I barely slept that night. Every word replayed, stabbing deeper into my chest. I whispered into the darkness of my room, my voice trembling. I'll show you. I'll show you who's useless. And deep inside, something shifted. The humiliation that once broke me started to harden into something else. Not anger. Not yet. But the seed of it. Still, I told myself maybe, just maybe, graduation. Night would be different. Maybe he'd surprise me. Maybe he'd finally see me. But I had no idea his cruelest words were yet to come, delivered in front of everyone I loved. Graduation day should have been the proudest moment of my life. I walked across the stage in my crimson gown, tassel brushing against my cheek, diploma in hand. The crowd clapped, the teachers smiled, and my friends cheered my name. But when I looked out into the stands, I didn't see my dad's pride. I saw his arms crossed, his expression flat. Even then, I told myself the party would be different. That maybe he'd soften, that maybe tonight would finally be the night he looked at me with pride. I was wrong. The yard glowed under strings of lights. Long tables stretched across the grass, plates stacked high with barbecue, pitchers of sweet tea sweating in the Texas heat. Music played from a speaker, and laughter filled the air. I moved between relatives, cheeks aching from polite smiles. "Congratulations, Hannah," they said, clapping my shoulder. "You must be so excited for college." I was, quietly. But every time I looked at Dad, leaning back in his chair with a beer in hand, a knot tightened in my stomach, because I knew the look on his face. The one who said he was waiting for his moment. As the night stretched on, someone called for a toast. All eyes turned to Dad. He stood, beer bottle raised, and the chatter died down. He cleared his throat, smiling faintly. "Well, here we are, 18 years. My daughter made it through." A few claps, some chuckles. My heart fluttered with fragile hope. Then his smile twisted. "And yet," he continued, "she still can't cook a meal without burning it, can't fix a flat, can't even mow a lawn straight." Laughter erupted, loud, unfiltered, cruel. My chest caved, my cheeks flushed hot, but he wasn't finished. He looked straight at me, eyes glinting. "Truth is, Hannah's useless, always has been." The world blurred, plates clinked, relatives shifted uncomfortably, whispers rippled through the crowd. But all I heard were those words. Useless. They hung in the air like a curse. I froze, paper plate trembling in my hand, staring at my father as though I didn't recognize him. My throat burned, but no sound came out. Ryan laughed with his friends near the grill. My mother looked down, lips pressed tight, as if she could disappear into the tablecloth, and I, his daughter, his so-called little champ, stood alone in a room full of people, humiliated. Then, a voice broke through. "Actually," the dean of admissions said, rising from his chair, "that's not true at all." The laughter stopped instantly. Heads turned. The dean smiled at me. "I'm proud to announce that Hannah Reed has been awarded a full scholarship, tuition, housing, the works, at one of the top universities in the country." Gasps echoed. A few clapped, hesitant at first, then louder. Stood frozen, my breath catching, the tears that had threatened to spill suddenly replaced with something sharper. Vindication. I'll never forget the look on his face. The color drained. His smirk faltered. For once, he had no words. He lowered his beer, his hand trembling slightly, eyes darting around the table as though searching for a way to spin it. But the silence was already damning. Because in that moment, everyone saw it. The man who called me useless was dead wrong. Applause rang out, people cheering, relatives hugging me, their congratulations warm and loud. But my father stayed seated, his jaw clenched, his knuckles white around his bottle. I glanced at him, waiting, hoping for something, an apology, a smile, a single word of pride. Nothing, only silence. And somehow that silence cut deeper than his words. That night, as I lay in bed, the applause still ringing faintly in my ears, I couldn't stop replaying it all. His laughter, his cruelty, his silence. I should have felt triumphant, but instead I felt hollow. And deep inside, I knew this wasn't over, not by a long shot. The morning after the graduation party, the applause and congratulations should have still been ringing in my ears. Instead, the only thing I heard was his voice. Truth is, Hannah's useless, always has been. I stared at the ceiling of my bedroom, the words clawing at my chest like barbed wire. No one called me that day. Not my cousins, not my grandparents, not even Mom. Maybe they thought the scholarship announcement made everything okay, that the dean's words had canceled out my father's cruelty, but it didn't, because no matter how loud the cheers were, the word useless had drowned them all. By evening, I couldn't stand the silence. I left my room, walked into the backyard, and sat in the chair where Dad had stood with his beer the night before. I whispered to the empty air, voice trembling. Was that really all I was to you? A joke? Tears spilled down my cheeks. The grass blurred. For the first time in years, I let myself cry. Not quiet tears in the bathroom, not muffled sobs into a pillow, but full, gut-wrenching sobs that ripped out of me. I cried for the little girl who once climbed onto his shoulders, believing he'd always be her hero. I cried for the teenager who worked herself raw, chasing grades he never cared about, and I cried for the young woman who stood humiliated in her own backyard, her achievements mocked by the very man who should have lifted her. The next week blurred. I went through the motions, packing my room, preparing for college, but I felt like a ghost in my own home. Dad acted like nothing had happened. Ryan joked, with his friends as if nothing had shattered me. Mom tried to offer comfort in her way, gentle cups of tea, a hand on my arm, but she never spoke the words I needed to hear. No one said he was wrong. No one said you're enough, and the silence became a second betrayal. One night, I sat on the floor surrounded by textbooks, scholarship forms, and college prep notes. My chest felt heavy, my eyes swollen from crying. I whispered to myself, maybe he's right. Maybe I am useless. But then my gaze fell on the scholarship letter. The one with my name printed in bold, the university crest shining at the top. And suddenly, another voice rose inside me. Not my father's, not my mother's, not Ryan's. My own. No. I earned this. I worked for this. I am not useless. The fire that had been smothered by his words flickered back to life. Small, fragile, but alive. I grabbed a notebook and a pen. On the first page, I wrote, I will not stay broken. Underneath, I listed every insult Dad had ever thrown at me, every dismissal, every time he laughed at my achievements. Then I wrote beside each one what I had done despite it. Awards, honors, scholarships, victories he refused to acknowledge. Page. After page, the truth stared back at me. He didn't define me. My work did. My determination did. And that night, I made a promise. His words would never chain me again. The next morning, I looked in the mirror. My eyes were still swollen, but there was something new in my reflection. Steel. I wasn't going to beg for his pride anymore. I wasn't going to shrink to fit his version of useful. If he wanted to call me useless, fine. I would build a life so undeniable, so unshakable, that his words would choke him every time he thought of me. Because I wasn't going to stay broken. I was going to rise. Quietly, patiently, relentlessly. And when the time came, he would regret every single laugh, every single word, every single moment he chose to dismiss me. The planning had just begun. Revenge didn't come to me in a flash. It came in steady, deliberate choices, one late-night decision after another. I didn't want to scream at him. I didn't want to throw his words back in his face. That would be too easy, too small. No, I wanted him to see, with his own eyes, how wrong he had been. And I wanted him to choke on it. I started with the scholarship letter. I read it over and over, tracing the words with my finger. Full ride, tuition, housing, all expenses covered. It wasn't just a gift. It was leverage. Dad had always dismissed academics, but here was something even he couldn't argue with. A university investing thousands of dollars in me because of my worth, and I knew. I could use that to dismantle every narrative he'd spun about me being useless. I bought a new notebook, not for school, but for my plan. On the first page, I wrote, "Prove him wrong, publicly." Beneath it, I began mapping out everything I'd need, gather evidence of my achievements, build allies who saw my value, find the right moment to expose him. Not just to me, but to everyone who believed his version of me. It wasn't about revenge in the cruel sense. It was about justice, about reclaiming the version of me he tried to erase. I dug out every certificate, every award, every recommendation letter I'd earned. I organized them into folders, printed them neatly, and highlighted the honors. For years, Dad had shrugged. When I brought home an A+, he'd sneer when I showed him medals. Now, I was turning all of those into a weapon, and when the moment came, I'd make sure no one in the family could deny the truth again. Mrs. Grant, my English teacher, became more than a mentor. She became my anchor. One afternoon, as I helped her pack up books for summer, she looked at me and said, "You're different, Hannah. Stronger than you realize." I hesitated, then whispered, "What if my own dad doesn't see that?" Her eyes softened. "Then let him live in his blindness. The rest of the world will see, and when they do, he won't be able to hide from it." Her words lit something in me. An idea. The university had invited scholarship recipients and their families to a special dinner at the end of the summer. A celebration. It would be the perfect stage. Professors, deans, students, families, all gathered in one room. And I decided that was where my father would face the truth, not in private, not in whispers, but in front of everyone. I began preparing my speech. At first, it was just a draft for the event. Thank yous, my story, the usual fluff, but then I sharpened it. Line by line, word by word. I didn't name him directly, but I painted the picture. A girl who was told she was useless, mocked for studying, belittled for dreaming. And then the reveal. A girl who stood on stage with a full scholarship, backed by the very university her father doubted she was worthy of. It was subtle, cutting, and it would leave no doubt. Still, at night, doubt gnawed at me. What if he laughed it off again? What if the family sided with him, saying I was being dramatic? I whispered to myself in the dark. No, not this time. This time, the proof will be undeniable. I clutched the scholarship letter like a lifeline, repeating those words until the fear quieted. By the time the dinner approached, my plan was set. My folders were packed, my speech was polished, my allies were ready. I wasn't just walking into that hall as Hannah, the useless daughter. I was walking in as Hannah Reed, scholarship recipient, survivor, and soon, the girl who would make her father eat his words. But whether he broke under it or fought back harder remained to be seen. The scholarship dinner was held at a downtown hotel ballroom, its chandeliers dripping light across tables covered in white linen and polished silverware. Waiters weaved between guests in crisp uniforms, carrying trays of sparkling cider. It was elegant, important, a place where people carried themselves taller, prouder, simply because they were part of the room. And I, the useless daughter, was one of the guests of honor. Mom wore her nicest dress, nervous but smiling. Ryan sulked beside her in a blazer he clearly hated. And Dad? He strolled in like he owned the place, chest puffed, shaking hands with strangers. He didn't look at me once. I clenched the folder under my arm, my proof, my shield. Tonight wasn't about begging for his approval. Tonight was about showing him and everyone else the truth he couldn't deny. As we sat down, Dad leaned toward me, his voice low. "Try not to embarrass yourself tonight, Hannah. These people are serious." I froze, my pulse spiking. "Embarrass myself?" I whispered back. "Dad, I'm the reason we're even here." He smirked, taking a long sip of his drink. "We'll see." The words hit like a familiar punch, but this time, instead of collapsing, I let them fuel me. One by one, students were called up to the stage. They spoke about their journeys, their dreams, and their gratitude. The room applauded warmly after each one. Then, the dean announced my name. My legs trembled as I walked up, but when I reached the microphone, a calmness washed over me. The lights were hot on my face, the room full of expectant eyes. This was it. I gripped the edges of the podium. My name is Hannah Reed. Tonight, I want to thank this university for seeing me. I let the silence linger, then continued. Because not everyone did. For years, I was told I wasn't enough, that I wasn't useful, that my hard work didn't matter. I saw heads turn at my table. Dad stiffened. Ryan smirked. Mom's hands twisted in her lap. But I kept going, I said, voice steady. I studied, I worked, I pushed forward. And now, because of that, I've been given this incredible opportunity, a full scholarship, not because of luck, because of effort. Applause burst across the room, filling my chest with something I hadn't felt in years. Validation. As I returned to my seat, my father's face was pale, jaw clenched. For once, he had no smart remark ready. Ryan leaned toward him, whispering something, but Dad ignored him. His hand tightened around his glass, the muscle in his cheek twitching. And when I sat down, I didn't look at him. Not once, because for the first time, I didn't need his eyes on me to know my worth. Throughout the dinner, professors and donors came up to shake my hand. Your speech was powerful. You're going to do great things. I thanked them, each word soaking into me like rain on parched ground. Dad sat stiff, ignored, no one asking for his opinion, no one praising him. For once, the spotlight wasn't his to twist. It was mine. Silence filled the car. Ryan tapped at his phone. Mom stared out the window. Finally, Dad muttered, "You didn't have to air family business like that." I turned to him, my voice calm, but sharp. I didn't air family business. I told my story. And whether you like it or not, people listened. He didn't respond. His hands tightened on the wheel, and in that silence, I knew I'd struck something deep. That night, lying in bed, I replayed the moment over and over, his clenched jaw, his silence, his loss of control. It wasn't the final victory, not yet, but it was the first crack in his armor, and I knew the bigger battle was still ahead. The scholarship dinner was only the beginning. My speech rattled him, but I wanted more than rattling. I wanted the man who called me useless in front of our entire family to sit in a room full of people and choke on the truth. And fate handed me the perfect stage. A few weeks later, the university invited me to speak at the Scholar Recognition Banquet, bigger than the first event. Hundreds of guests, professors, donors, families, local press. When I received the invitation, my heart raced. This was it. The moment to cement my place and to make sure my father could never erase me again. I told him casually at dinner, "They've asked me to speak again." He smirked, stabbing his steak. "Don't get cocky. They'll figure out soon enough you're just book smart." Ryan laughed, nearly choking on his drink. I didn't argue. I only smiled, because I already knew this was the night I'd take everything back. I spent nights drafting, rewriting, and rehearsing. My speech wasn't just about me. It was about the story he tried to bury. I wove in the struggles, the dismissals, the constant reminder that I wasn't enough. But I never said his name. I didn't have to. The words would hang heavy, and anyone who heard them would know the weight behind them. Mrs. Grant read the final draft and leaned back, eyes shining. This isn't just a speech, Hannah. This is your truth. And when you speak it will echo. The ballroom shimmered under crystal chandeliers. Reporters milled about with cameras. Students in gowns and suits clustered in groups. I stood at the back with my notes, pulse hammering. My family sat at a round table near the front. Dad, arms crossed, already restless. Ryan is scrolling on his phone. Mom is fiddling with her napkin. When the dean introduced me, the applause was warm, steady. I walked to the podium, the spotlight hot on my skin. This was it. I gripped the microphone. My voice trembled at first, then steadied. My name is Hannah Reed. For years, I worked for this moment. Long nights, endless studying, sacrifices no one else saw. But the hardest part wasn't the work. It was the voices. I let the silence hang. The voices that told me I wasn't enough, that studying was useless, that I was useless. A murmur rippled through the crowd. At our table, I saw Dad stiffen, but I kept going. I pushed forward, even when it felt like no one believed in me, because deep down I knew the truth. Usefulness isn't measured by who can grill a steak or change a tire. It's measured by persistence, by resilience, by refusing to quit when people expect you to. The room was silent, hanging on every word. And tonight, I stand here on a full scholarship, not because it was handed to me, but because I earned it. I'm here to prove that worth cannot be erased, not by doubt, not by silence, not even by the people closest to us. Applause thundered through the room, louder than anything I'd ever heard. I glanced at our table. Mom clapped, eyes wet. Ryan looked stunned, his smirk gone. And Dad? His jaw was locked, his face red, his hands clenched around his glass. For the first time in my life, he looked small. People at nearby tables glanced at him, whispering. They knew. They saw. He had mocked me, erased me, tried to crush me. And now he sat exposed, powerless, while the entire room rose to their feet. As I stepped off the stage, people reached out to shake my hand. Professors, donors, even strangers. Your words moved me. You're an inspiration. And Dad had to watch. Every handshake, every praise, every acknowledgement of the daughter he called useless. I didn't look at him. Not once. Because, for the first time, I didn't need his approval. I had the world's. The banquet ended in cheers, but the ride home was silent. Dad gripped the wheel, his knuckles white. I could feel the storm brewing beside me, his pride splintering under the weight of my success. And I knew the fallout of tonight hadn't even begun. The ride home from the banquet was suffocating. The car was silent except for the hum of the highway. Mom stared out the window. Ryan scrolled on his phone, and Dad gripped the wheel so tightly his knuckles looked bone white. Finally, he muttered, "You made me look like a fool tonight." I stared straight ahead. "No, Dad. You did that to yourself." His jaw tightened. He didn't respond, but I saw it, the crack in his armor, the way humiliation sat on him heavier than his pride ever had. The next few days, the whispers spread. Relatives who attended the banquet called Mom. "Your daughter's speech was incredible. She's going places." But beneath the praise was something else, the subtle shift in tone when they mentioned Dad. "He should be proud, Tom. She proved you wrong. For a man who lived on respect, it was poison." He snapped more often. At Ryan for leaving dishes in the sink. At Mom for forgetting to buy his favorite beer. At me for walking around the house like I owned the place. But his anger no longer cut the way it used to, because I knew the truth, and so did everyone else. One evening, Mom knocked softly on my door. She stepped inside, her eyes tired, her hands twisting nervously. "You were brave," she whispered. I looked at her, searching. "Why didn't you ever defend me, Mom?" She lowered her eyes. "I thought keeping peace was protecting you." "Peace?" My voice cracked. "You let him call me useless for years. You let him erase me in front of everyone. That wasn't peace. That was silence." Her shoulders shook. "You're right. And I'm sorry." For the first time, I saw her not as my shield, but as another person trapped in his shadow. Ryan was harder to read. At first, he mocked me less, avoided me more. But one afternoon, he leaned against my doorway, arms crossed. "Didn't think you had it in you," he said. I frowned. "Had what in me?" He smirked faintly. "Making Dad look that small." It wasn't praise, but it wasn't mockery either. It was respect. Begrudging, maybe, but real. And in that moment, I realized even Ryan, his golden child, saw the cracks now. Of course, Dad couldn't let it go. One night, he cornered me in the kitchen. His voice was low, dangerous. "You embarrassed me. In front of everyone." I met his gaze steadily. "No, Dad. I told the truth. If that embarrasses you, maybe you should think about why." His face flushed red. For a moment, I thought he'd explode. But instead, he stepped back, shaking his head. "You'll regret this one day," he muttered. But his words didn't land, because for the first time, I didn't believe him. Late at night, I sat by my window, staring at the city lights. I should have felt triumphant, victorious, and part of me did. But another part felt heavy. Revenge isn't clean. It doesn't erase the years of humiliation, the nights I cried alone, the silence I carried. It doesn't give you back the father you once hoped for. What it gives you is clarity. The clarity to see who people really are. The clarity to stop begging for love they'll never give. The clarity to build something better, stronger, beyond them. As summer waned and college drew closer, I felt it. The shift. Dad no longer saw me as invisible. He saw me as a threat. And while part of me still ached for the father I once thought I had, the stronger part knew I didn't need him anymore. Because my life was no longer defined by his words. It was defined by me. The day I packed my bags for college, the house felt different. The walls no longer echoed with my father's words. They echoed with my own silence, my own choice to step forward without looking back. Mom hovered in the doorway as I zipped my suitcase shut. "You have everything?" she asked softly. I nodded. "Everything I need." She hesitated, then hugged me tight. "I'm sorry for not being stronger." I held her, tears pricking my eyes. "You don't have to be sorry, Mom. Just be proud of me now." She nodded, her voice breaking. "I always was." When I carried my bag downstairs, Dad didn't even look up from the TV. He grunted, "Good luck," like it was an afterthought. But for once, it didn't sting. Because I didn't need his blessing to walk out the door. That night, in my dorm room, surrounded by blank walls and fresh notebooks, I lay in bed and listened to the hum of campus life outside my window. For the first time, I wasn't defined by being the daughter of Tom Reed. I was just Hannah, scholar, survivor, fighter. And in the quiet of that moment, I realized something. His word, useless, wasn't a curse anymore. It was fuel. Revenge didn't erase the hurt. It didn't give me the father I once hoped for, but it gave me clarity. I learned that worth isn't granted by someone else's approval. Worth is built through persistence, resilience, and the refusal to shrink under someone else's shadow. And once you see that clearly, no insult can hold you down. Now, whenever I hear his voice in my head, mocking, dismissing, belittling, I answer back, "You were wrong. I was never useless. I was unstoppable, and that's the truth he'll live with every day." Because every time he thinks of me, every time someone asks about his daughter, he'll remember the night I stood in front of hundreds of people and proved him wrong. I don't know what the future holds. Long nights of study, new challenges, maybe even new heartbreaks. But I know this. I'll face them with strength, with determination, with the knowledge that no one, not even my father, gets to erase me. And that is freedom. If this story touched you, please like and subscribe. It helps more than you know. Tell me, if someone you loved called you useless, would you fight to prove them wrong or walk away forever? Share your story in the comments. I'd love to hear it. Because sometimes the sweetest revenge isn't changing their mind, it's changing your life.